That's important to show that, yes, hey, I'm human like anybody else. And things
Hmm.
happen to me regardless of how many implants, 35,000 plus I've placed, how many thousands of bone grafts and soft tissue grafts. Things happen.
Yeah.
And folks like to see that. Otherwise, if we're just showing the best of what we can show, then that's a misleading element in and of itself.
Welcome to Community Conversations, a podcast for general practitioners and specialists at dental practices who are focused on growing the practice of implantology. In each episode, we cover trends and advancements in implantology, the challenges facing practitioners, and share experiences from MODIS Dental Partners' multidisciplinary practices. Ultimately, you will gain insight into your growing practice. Let's get started.
Dr. Pikos is the founding doctor of MODIS Dental Partners. Dr. Pikos, an oral maxillofacial surgeon, graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from The Ohio State University. He's the founder and CEO of the Pikos Institute, and since 1990, he's been teaching advanced bone and soft tissue grafting courses, along with full arch, immediate reconstruction courses, with alumni that now number more than 6,000 from all 50 states and 67 countries. He's lectured extensively on dental implants in the U.S. and internationally, and is a well-published author, including his recent book, Bone Augmentation in Implant Dentistry. Dr. Pikos maintains a private practice which is limited exclusively to implant reconstruction surgery in Trinity, Florida. I hope you enjoy our wide-ranging conversation that starts at the very beginning from his childhood influences. We cover a little-known stint of his as a door-to-door salesman. We cover the importance of culture while building coastal jaw surgery and the Pikos Institute, and why he's so excited about partnering with MODIS Dental Partners and the Thurston Group, and how he's managed to stay humble through 4 decades of success. Welcome to the first episode of Community Conversations with MODIS.
Good afternoon, Pete.
Yeah, hey, look, I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I thought for our inaugural podcast that it just made all the sense in the world to talk to our founding doctor. And really the purpose of this here is, Mike, I think many people know of you, but not a lot of people probably know about you in a deep way. And I thought this format and conversation would be a great way for you to share more about your life.
Well, great. I think it's a great idea, and I'm really honored and looking forward to this podcast.
Awesome. Hey, so we're going to start all the way back at the beginning, Mike. I wanted to start off and really just ask a broad question. What was your childhood like? Where'd you grow up? Talk me through those formative years.
Sure. Well, my roots go back to northeastern Ohio, specifically Campbell, Ohio. It's spelled like the soup, pronounced like the animal. It's a tiny town in, again, northeastern Ohio, and about 18,000 people, I believe, at the time. And most everybody worked at the local steel mills. My grandfather worked in the mills, and in fact, never had a car, and I should say, walked roughly 4.5 miles each way to the steel plant. And for that matter, we lived in one house for the first 10 years of my life, meaning from 0 to 10, it was myself and my maternal grandparents, my parents, my 2 sisters, an uncle, and myself. So 3 generations in one house for 10 years. And in fact, I only spoke Greek when I went to kindergarten. So being of Greek ancestry, the ethnic background being what it is, I, again, only spoke that language, and then slowly weaned away and, of course, just spoke English, starting to lose some of the Greek. Had to go to Greek school, like it or not. I hated it. But for 3 days a week, for 7 years, there I was. And to this day, I'm very grateful because I can speak both languages. But back to those early years, they were very formative for me because I watched my grandfather, like I said, walk that 4.5 miles each way to that Youngstown sheet and tube. And I also saw my dad work two physical jobs as a welder and a carpenter. So 4 in the morning, he would get up and come home 9, 10 at night. It was tough,
Yeah.
but that left quite an imprint on me from a work ethic standpoint. The just the fact that I saw that and others in the community doing the same thing, it just kind of left a significant impact on me, so that the work ethic was there from very young and more or less ingrained in me. But the growing up in that type of environment, it's a very warm and loving one. My parents were very, very interested in me having an education, as was true for my siblings, two sisters that I have. And the grandparents did not really ever speak English, but their impact on me was significant as well. As they say, it takes a village to raise a child. In this case, it was very true, having my parents, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, so did everything for us, involved with all of school functions, PTAs, spelling bees, you name it. So she played a key role for me in growing up as well. Very important to have both parents being so supportive of me. And then that morphed into literally middle and high school, all in the same hometown. By the way, after year 10, we just moved 3 blocks away. My dad, being a carpenter, built a house for us without blueprints, I might add. He was an amazing man, very meticulous, very attention to detail, and in fact was so detailed and perfectionistic that also kind of more or less got ingrained in me, for better or for worse. Being a perfectionist has its ups and downs. But I will say this, that I did help him build that house. I was age 12 at the time. As a helper, I got to see firsthand the work that he could do, not just as a general type of carpenter, but his finish work was amazing. Miter joints, for example, he made a big deal of it. He had a small miter box that I still have to this day, that he would always say, you don't want to have any caulking compound in any of these joints. You have to have a perfect joint everywhere, or do it over. So that taught me a lot right there.
Right.
And moving forward, the impact was pretty amazing for the rest of my life. Again, my dad in particular being probably the biggest, I'd say, mentor that I've ever had, best friend, and just created an environment along with my mom that was just conducive to being able to morph into what I am today, because the core values that, I just cherish so much, and with my wife and I have imparted to our kids as well, of honesty, integrity, a good work ethic, a strong work ethic, being accountable and responsible for what we do. And with a solid spiritual base, we're Greek Orthodox religion, and church was very important to us growing up, and to this day, for that matter. So all of this together, along with the entire community, again, it takes, a village to raise a child, for sure. The impact by all these folks and others that I could really spend quite a bit of time listing made for, I think, a very, very solid foundation for me as I continued my schooling and into my adulthood and personal and professional life.
Yeah. So, Mike, what kind of kid were you? Were you a precocious little guy? Were you barely obedient?
I probably obedient to a fault, to be honest. I was. I liked to push the envelope a little bit, but not too far, because my dad was very stern. It's good to have a stern parent and one that, kind of lets you get away with murder. Well, the latter was my mother, thank God. because Dad was a tough disciplinarian and had to be home by a certain time, et cetera, all through high school. It was not that easy. But I will say this, at the end of the day, the discipline factor was huge, because Dad literally was pulled out of school at a very young age, 8th, 9th grade, during Depression years. His dad left him before he was a year old, and there were 5 sisters and a mentally challenged brother to support. So my grandmother, his mom, against the better wishes of the school teacher at the time, tried to even bribe her and say, look, we'll give you food stamps, we'll give you more things to keep Tony in school. Well, she took all of that and still pulled him out. So he had an 8th grade education to start, but then enlisted in the Navy after Pearl Harbor hit, like so many of our World War II vets, joined the Navy and was in the 5 major battles of the Atlantic Theater, which is impressive in and of itself to survive all of them. Bizerti, North Africa, Anzio, Sicily, Salerno, and D-Day Normandy. He made it through all of them, fortunately, and brought back nothing but discipline and respect, a true patriot for his country. And all of this, he really walked the talk and instilled in us as kids. So that discipline factor was there, again, from a little boy for me. So I guess, to make a short story long, I was a pretty compliant kid. I almost didn't have a choice, or I'd have gotten the you-know-what kicked out of me. So I learned that at a young age, but it was a good thing. It was a good thing.
Yeah. At what age or stage did you realize that the profession of dentistry was going to be your calling?
Well, I wish I could tell you that as a youngster, I always wanted to be a dentist, either orthodontist or whatever. But I took quite a diverse path to dentistry. To begin with, in high school, I worked hard and was valedictorian of my class. I was class president, senior class president, involved in a number of sports, and as well as music, played trumpet and alto horn, did all kind of neat stuff. But honestly, I wasn't real sure what I wanted to do. But geology was something that my father thought would be best for his son, type thing.
Yeah.
So from a fairly young age, petroleum engineering was kind of talked to me by my dad, such that, hey, this should be something good for you. Check it out. You can make a great living, etc. Well, long story short, I began my undergrad education out west at Colorado College. I was actually accepted at the Colorado School of Mines, which would have been a major mistake had I accepted to go there, only because it's such a narrow curriculum.
Yeah.
And I definitely wasn't cut out for that particular profession. So after a year, even at that liberal arts school, which is an excellent school, I very much enjoyed myself there, but realized that early on that geology definitely wasn't my bag. And I wanted to get back to more the biologic sciences, which was my true strength. So I transferred to West Virginia University, where my uncle was a Greek Orthodox priest at the time, and thought that I would be able to save money, room and board. Why not? So spent a year there. He, in turn, was transferred to Fresno, California, to another parish. So then I, in turn, transferred into Ohio State, in-state school, and finished up 3 years there. So at that time, I decided on pre-med, and medicine to me made sense. I liked children a lot, so wanted to be a pediatrician. Well, after being in med school, and by the way, I was accepted at all the schools I applied to. I had an undergrad cum of 3.9, summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, all the big honors and stuff. Well, once I got in med school, I had a preceptorship where I was able to see firsthand a couple of deaths of some real young kids, and it bothered me a lot, to the point where I started to do a lot of soul searching, and to make a long story short, decided medicine wasn't for me, and opted to leave medical school after that year and explore other areas. I wasn't real sure what I was going to be doing, to be honest.
Yeah.
But after some time off, kind of getting my wits together, getting into some sales work, which was another story, but it helped me quite a bit to just kind of clear my head, reevaluate. And dentistry kind of seemed logical after all is said and done. I went down the list, law, no aptitude, pharmacology, nah. I really want to be interactive with patients, with people. So
Mm.
dentistry, checked it out. I went to visit a couple dentists in the area back home in my hometown. Think I could do this. And once in dental school, things changed quite a bit as I rotated through the different departments.
Mhm.
Surgery was one that intrigued me the most. And I really decided to focus on that. It just impressed me so much. So after a GPR in Dayton, Ohio at Miami Valley Hospital, which was a surgical-based GPR, the light bulb definitely went on for sure. And I knew surgery would be what I'd want to be doing. So I then did a residency in oral maxillofacial surgery at Montefiore Hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and really enjoyed my time there, and ultimately came right down to Florida, to Palm Harbor. The roots being in Florida because my dad, after the war, although he settled in Ohio, the jobs were there, became a welder and
Mhm.
a carpenter, as I mentioned. We would jump in the station wagon and come down every 3 years or so and vacation, and I loved it. So 1983, made a beeline to Florida, set up on my own to Tarpon Springs area, Palm Harbor specifically.
Yep.
And then, of course, as they say, the rest is history. Now it is to this month, almost to the day, 40 years later, here I
Mm.
am with the practice and the institute, and looking back, as they say, at the blink of an eye, what
Hmm.
happened.
I'm gonna rewind the clock just a little bit because I don't think of all the conversations I've had with you, Mike, you've ever mentioned a short stint in sales.
That was something that I'm quite proud of. At the time, I'll be honest, I was going through such soul searching that I was just pretty hard on myself. Like,
Yeah.
with the background of being valedictorian and then summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, all that,
Mm.
getting at all the med schools, they were deciding that that's not for me. As an ethnic kid in particular, I felt like I was letting like the whole community down. All eyes were on Mike.
Yeah.
So I felt just a lot of pressure, and my goodness, like what am I going to do with the rest of my life type thing.
Yeah.
So at that time, I mean, my parents could not afford to really pay for much more of what I was going to be doing. My dad being a carpenter, welder, as I said, I had scholarships all the way through.
Yeah.
So long story short, I answered this ad. By the way, I went back to Columbus, Ohio during this time off
Yep.
and answered this blind ad. Of course, didn't realize it was sales. If I had, I wouldn't have gone, like probably most everyone else that went that night. And there were probably 30, 35 of us. And one by one, as we realized it was a sales pitch, people were leaving. I
Yeah.
was the last one left. Out of courtesy to the speaker, I thought, I can't leave. So I heard the whole pitch, and believe it or not, it was Cutco cutlery and wherever aluminum, I believe, for pots and pans, you name it. The whole pitch was to be direct sales to more or less young working gals, with a hope chest pitch and what have you. Well, when I saw the demo, I was so impressed. I thought, I'm going to buy this myself, but I'll never sell. There's no
Yeah.
way. So the demo was so impressive that the actual knives sold themselves, the way they showed how it could cut through a rope and cut
Mhm.
leather and what have you. And I mean, everything that made a lot of sense. It was a high quality item.
Yep.
So I decided, let me give it a shot. Why not? You get desperate, you need to make money. So when all was said and done, I was making 40% commissions on my own work and then 10% with the folks under me. So it was pretty lucrative and I was doing well. But of course, I decided I need to get back in school. And that's when things started to fall in place with the dentistry, as I mentioned earlier, as a profession. But that stint really taught me a lot. It
Mm.
opened me up quite a bit. I was pretty shy kind of guy,
Yep.
and this allowed me the opportunity to just talk more freely and engage with folks. And let's
Hmm.
face it, everything is sales if you think about it, whether it's personal, professional, whatever. We're selling some idea, some product, technology, whatever. And that really taught me some real fundamental principles that to this day have helped me immensely with my personal and certainly professional life.
Hmm. Yeah. That's interesting. Thanks for sharing. My dad's youngest brother, he he also happened to sell Cutco knives.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think he did it shortly after university. And while he didn't make a career of it either, I think he did find a talent and a passion for sales and moved into pharmaceuticals.
Wow.
Yeah.
I still have those knives, believe it or not. I use them every day.
Is that
And in
right?
fact, I just got in touch with a local fella because they're only sold door to door. You can't buy them anywhere else. And I'm in touch with this young fella because I definitely want to purchase more, even as gifts. They're
Yeah.
amazing. They really are.
Yeah. Fast forwarding now, you finished your residency, moved down to Palm Harbor. If you could give me a sense nationwide, how many residents graduate and immediately start their own business?
That's a good question, Pete. I don't think I can give you any type of a number, but I would say percent wise, a very small number
Yeah.
today for sure
Hmm.
would be coming out and setting up on their own. Very, very few.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Even in my day, it was not the easiest thing to do,
yeah.
but I decided to kind of bite the bullet. The opportunities were few and far between. I wanted to be in the Tarpon Springs area where my dad grew up. So I thought, let me just do this. And it was interesting to say the least at first. I mean, fear is a great motivator, and
Yeah.
I was willing to paint houses, pump gas, do whatever I had to do to make things work. But the early years were kind of fun, and it worked out quite well.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about those early years. I imagine there was a good bit of bootstrapping that had to happen to go from a resident straight out of residency and opening your own practice.
Well, for sure, I really wanted to be an associate with somebody, but the opportunities, as I mentioned, were very few, and those that were there were not that appealing at all.
Hmm.
So I did set up in a 1,200 square foot office on US 19 in Palm Harbor,
Hmm.
which is again my beginning, and it was scary. I'll admit that. Nobody to talk to learn from
Yeah.
directly. No direct mentorship type thing. But being able to explore different opportunities and being open minded, I really just decided to, let's bite the bullet and make the best of it and be as proactive as possible. So I got on staff at a number of hospitals, in fact, ultimately seven.
Wow.
So I took trauma call round the clock, and that really got me started quite well. I think a number of folks in the area thought I was a plastic surgeon for a while because I was doing everything. I mean, literally sewing up faces, putting ears back, noses,
Yeah.
fractures galore. So that really jump started the practice, to be honest.
Hmm.
And from there, it morphed into getting a second office and bringing in an associate with that time with me for actually 20 years, ultimately, Mark
Yeah.
Mitchell, a super young man. And we then expanded to a third office, brought in another associate. So we expanded that way until ultimately today we've got six offices and there are eight of
Hmm.
us in the practice. But early on, again, just to backtrack, it was very interesting and took a lot of sacrifice. For probably close to 5 years, I did not have a day off at all. And during that time, studying for boards like everyone else had to do,
Yep.
and then take those boards. That was time consuming, but it all worked out well in the long run. But again, a lot of sacrifice and what have you, that by today's standards, residents coming out, joining practices like ours, the trauma call is really minimal. I mean, we're
Right.
talking maybe every 6 to 8 weeks for a week. to be on at at one hospital only. A
Mhm.
big difference than in my era.
Yeah. So from the time you started in the 1,200 square foot practice, how many years passed until you expanded and added an associate?
Actually, it was only 3 years,
Wow.
and because my start, before I actually had that Palm Harbor office built, I was working out of another doctor's office. He was actually a general dentist that did a 1-year program in the Army, exodontia. So he didn't hold himself out as neurosurgeon, but he did a lot of exodontia. And I was able to hook up with him for what I thought would be just a few months till I got the Palm
Mhm.
Harbor office built out and ready to go. Little did I know it would turn into another year, a full year or so. And then he sold me that building,
Mm.
and he's since retired. So I had two places, and that's when I brought in Mark, our first associate slash
Yeah.
partner. And so that meant we had two places. And then from there, Spring Hill, which is further north of us, we established an office there and brought in still another doc. And it kind of morphed from there to the
Yeah.
present.
Now, any formal leadership training along the way, Mike?
Nothing formal, Pete. I'll be
Yeah.
honest, it was the old school of hard knocks and trial and
Yeah.
error. I look back and certainly made a number of, I'll call them definitely mistakes,
Yeah.
no question. Wish I had known better, but they were innocent mistakes, and I can live
Mhm.
with that
Yeah.
all the way through. And I think that's important for all of us to know
Yeah.
that there is no clear path, I think, for
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah.
Failure, if you want to call it that, has to happen. And we've had associates come and go, a number
Mm.
of consultants that we've had that didn't work out. I mean, on and on, things happen. But
Yeah.
from a pure leadership perspective, I kind of learned as I went along.
Yeah.
And I love to read. I truly enjoy that a lot. So, of course, with the advent of the internet and having availability 24/7 for video tutorials and you name it, it's made a huge difference over time. I
Yeah.
wish I'd had access to some of that maybe at a younger time in my career. But either way, it all worked out well. But most importantly, pure leadership has been
Mhm.
kind of on the job training, so to speak.
Yeah. Most of the best leadership trainings on the job. If you're open, I'd love to explore, just think about one failure in life professionally and how it shaped, informed the person that you've become over time. As you say, we all learn from our mistakes.
I would say, and I'll call it a failure only in the sense that I would say myself, like many of us,
Mhm.
succeeded in spite of what we've done and knew. In essence, what I'm saying is that I really wish I had gotten involved from a business perspective earlier on in my career.
Yeah.
So I'll call that a failure in that I made mistakes along the way because of lack of that type of formal training.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, so many of us, actually, virtually all of us, are in that same more or less category, unless we had a parent or somebody ahead of us that had a business background that could instill some of those concepts and ideas and guidance. There's no formal training for us in dental school or even postgraduate training. So we come out and we're armed clinically to succeed to at least to a large degree. But from
Yeah.
a pure business perspective, boy, it's a tough route. So over time, it took its toll in terms of spending monies and making mistakes that would even cost me having a certain associate or two stay with
Yeah.
me, only because I didn't have a game plan from way back. But over time, things took care of themselves, so to speak, and I
Yeah.
was able to still do very well and succeed in so many ways. I've been blessed. I mean, a million times. I have no complaints really whatsoever of these 40 years now that have kind of come and gone. But the business element is what's important as I see it now, and I'm sure we'll get to the topic of the MODIS platform and why it's so unique from a business perspective, having
Yeah,
incorporated that sector into the institute.
absolutely. We'll hang on to that one and come back when we get to the institute. Before we move on, I'd love to hear about the culture that you either intentionally brought to Coastal Jaw, or the culture that you brought to Coastal Jaw just being the person that you are. But how would you characterize the culture of your team?
That's a great question, Pete. I really take pride in being for, again, the way I was raised. My family environment was very conducive to a lot of compassion, a lot of love, and humility.
Yeah.
And because of that, I in turn was able to pretty much incorporate the same concepts within my practice. Now, that said, I'm going to be honest and tell you that in my early years, I had a lot to learn. I was a bit of
Yeah.
a hothead, to say the least. Still have some
Mhm.
of those tendencies for sure. But honestly, it didn't take too long for me to figure that one out. Otherwise, I would have not had anyone around me, including staff in
Mm,
particular. So I had to learn that one fast. But
yeah.
honestly, it just worked out so well. It was just a natural thing because, again, being raised the way I was, everybody's a friend, a nice firm
Mhm.
handshake. You can trust people, that type
Yep.
of, mentality, and being able to look somebody in the eyes and engage easily and embrace, each and every one of my patients. It's just a natural thing, again, from a warm ethnic environment that I was product of.
Yep.
It just all came kind of naturally. So in turn, I've instilled those same types of more or less concepts and way of doing things with the entire crew, our docs, our staff. So the culture, if you will, is one of warmth, of making people feel welcome all the time. Our practice is a home for them to become part of our family type, thinking and mentality. So in that respect, it wasn't that hard to incorporate that culture. But again, it took time. Did not happen
Yeah.
overnight. I'll be honest. It's like everything's new. You're right out of a residency, setting up your practice. You've got a thousand things to think about. There's a lot of stress going on. And to
Yeah.
say that I was just a Mr. Nice guy smiling all the time from the beginning would not be true at all. But
Yeah.
again, that said, it didn't take too long to figure things out and get right back to true north and, be a good guy and treat people fairly, and everything kind of works out well from there because you're just being yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that was the way you were raised.
Yes.
And, as somebody that's only known you for just a little less than a year, what I'll say is everybody at the practice calls it family. And I'll also echo the hothead part. I've never seen it. So you've clearly you've grown out of that a good 30 plus years ago, from what I can tell. When I was in the Army and spending time downrange getting shot at, I found that the times when we were under fire, uh, what what the men needed from me most was to be calm and collected. And so I would often on the radio speak softer and more slowly when we were getting shot at, because the last thing they needed was somebody on the other side of the radio yelling at them when they were already under a tremendous amount of stress. And so
Wow.
it does resonate.
Sure. What a great analogy, and so critical, because that's exactly right. As a true leader, you set the tone.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So Mike, before we move off of the coastal jaw, I just want to ask maybe a broad question. There's going to be some listeners out there that may be in a situation where they're trying to build a multidisciplinary team like yours. 2, 3 nuggets of wisdom. What would you tell them if they were, you know, Dr. Mike Pikos 25 years ago, starting to form this multidisciplinary team?
Well, Pete, I would say there are several important items in order to incorporate multi-specialties under one roof.
Yeah.
Probably the first one and the most important, as would be true for bringing anybody into your practice, is the personality type we're looking at. I guess the old saying, you can bring a staff person in without dental training, which we do quite a bit,
Yeah.
as long as the attitude is there. And as best as we can tell, the personality is a good, warm one. Well, then
Mm.
we can teach them whatever needs to be taught. Certainly, the same be true for an associate doctor.
Mhm.
Personality type is very important, and of course, overall attitude to be consistent with us already. That's number one, as I
Yeah.
see it. And then let's see. Secondly, I would probably look at certainly their understanding of being able to cooperate among ourselves and knowing that, we have surgeons, oral surgeons, we have periodontists and a prost. So,
Yeah.
so the ability to be compatible with other specialties. Now, how do you tell that? Well, that's a bit of a crapshoot. People can say certain things, but then actions speak louder than words. You don't know what's going
Yeah.
to happen till you get folks in that particular work environment. But for the most part, from a series of interviews, I think those first two items can be pretty well evaluated and understood to be there or not. So
Yeah.
those are probably the two big ones. Apart from that, I think the other one would be a real thirst for learning and being able to share
Mm.
knowledge among ourselves, because
Yeah.
traditionally, for sure, oral surgeons and periodontists, bit of a turf war mentality. I embraced the synergistic element between the two specialties many, many years ago. In
Yeah.
fact, boy, go back well over 20 years ago when I first got involved with Maurice Salama. We
Mhm.
formed what we called Partners in Synergy at that time. And for 16 years, every 2 years, we would get together for 2 full days, including a day before that with workshops, to spend time on hard and soft tissue grafting
Hmm.
material, concepts, surgical principles, and protocols. And here's a really sharp periodontist with an oral surgeon together. It's almost like oil and water because,
Yeah.
again, traditionally the disciplines are at each other's, throats, so to speak, at odds with each other. I never liked that concept and thought process at all. So in
Yeah.
that sense, I was a bit of a maverick within my specialty in particular, because a lot of folks in my camp, even to this day, look upon periodontists as the enemy.
Mhm.
Whereas in fact, we should learn from each other. So
Yeah.
because of that, I think it's important that we truly see the value. So those probably three elements would be the most important ones. And having
Yeah.
Prost on board now, honestly, is a no-brainer, because as a prosthodontist, having Dr. Hedger with us for now almost 7 years, we have the innate ability to, under one roof, do all of our full arch cases
Yeah.
from a surgical and restorative perspective, and of course, lab in a very, very efficient manner.
Mhm. Yeah, what you just described is sounds simple and yet so hard to do. And I've spent time in the practice, and all of your doctors are such high performing individuals, and yet together they truly work as a team. They speak highly of each other as colleagues. It is a family environment that you've managed to foster in the face of also having individually high performing individuals. That is a not a simple not a simple thing to pull off, and it's quite impressive. It,
Well, thank you. It's taken some time, but quite honestly, Pete, it becomes natural because people, as we bring folks into the practice, they see, and it's almost like an understood thing of what's expected of them, although we
yeah.
certainly give them some guidelines.
Hmm.
But it's more of a, wow, this is kind of neat. We have no real caps on us. We can grow
Mm.
within the practice and develop. And kind of work within whatever parameters we feel comfortable, being with, and the everybody around us is of the same kind of mentality.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this is a good way to transition. You talked about curiosity, you talked about collaboration. At what point did you have any conception of the Pikos Institute?
That's a great question, because I love to share this storyline. It was in 1990
Okay.
that I decided to have a small group get together, only because I had roughly 8 colleagues at the time, all surgeons, call me and say, "Hey, Mike, how about putting something together? We'll come down, spend a few days with you, and just, show us what you're doing. We're so impressed, blah, blah, blah." Well, that
Mhm.
was in 1990. I started practice in 83. And for those 7 years, implants, which literally in 1983 was such an amazingly different, brand new item for all of
Yeah.
us, axial implants, that you had to be in one of two camps, either with Dr. Jerry Nisnik or with Dr. Branamore. I chose the Nisnik route. And for those next 7 years, those are the implants I placed, roughly 1,000 during the 80s had I
Yeah.
placed, and a number of grafting techniques that I did, not so much developed, but began to do and learn from other courses that I took. And again,
Yeah.
I'm a consummate student. I love to learn. I love to take courses. I average about 130 hours of CE per year my entire career, well
Mm.
over 6,000 hours and counting. So long story short, during those 80s, I took the courses, morphed into my practice different techniques. And by 1990-ish, when I had that group come down, and at that time it was slide projectors, the old fashioned, always
Yeah.
two, though I never liked one. So my Palm Harbor office upstairs, really small area. We sat there almost like playing cards in a big poker table. And for 2 days nonstop, just case after case after case, showing what I'm doing. And I was
Yeah.
more than happy to share that with my colleagues. And then having taken a couple courses out in California, well, I tell you, that opened up my eyes with regard to what could be done from a true teaching perspective with live surgery. Didn't even think about that one. So I was able to bring back that same concept, and within that same year, set up a formal course with doing live surgery and
Mhm.
having it piped from the downstairs operatory to the upstairs. And boom, that was the initial formal course of the
Yeah.
Institute.
Was that the
And
first course that you charged the tuition for?
what did I charge? Wow.
Or no, not what. But was that the first time you charged
Oh,
tuition
that
for the
yes,
course?
yes, that
Got
fall.
it.
Yeah, from early in the year, like the January, February with that initial group to the
Mhm.
fall is right. That was the first formal course.
Got it.
Correct. Correct. And boy, I tell you what, it was an amazing feeling being
Yeah.
able to share what I'm doing. And that was just a turn on for me.
Yeah.
And that got me super excited. I never liked the idea of academics per se because of all the political things that go on.
Mhm.
I don't do well in that type of an environment. So being able to be independent over all these years in particular, little did I know, by the way, that this thing would become what it has become to this day. 33, almost 34 years later of teaching at the Institute, 6,000 alumni, all 50 states and 67 countries. I had no idea from that very first bone grafting based course what would
Mhm.
happen ultimately. It just sort of evolved. So I would like to say I planned a true institute from the beginning, but I really did not. It just kind of happened along the way. Amazing how I look back on
Yeah.
those early years.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question for you. Ever in your wildest dreams did you think you would have taught? I think the number is actually getting closer to 6,500 at this point. Students, 6,000 students. in all 50 states, multiple countries. How did your kind of mentality around the institute evolve from? It sounded like it first began because there was some local interest among surgeons. Then California was a real milestone experience for you for where the institute could go. But at what point did you have any idea that, wow, this is bigger than I had ever imagined?
Probably about 10 years into the actual institute did I really believe that this was going to really be
Yeah.
something that I can't just walk away from. In fact, to be
Mhm.
honest, as I told my wife, Diane, she reminds me of this to this day. Because those early years, I spent a lot of time just putting the
Oh,
courses together and lining up patients for the live surgery, which, by the way, at that time, it was a full day of surgery, like multiple back to back to back from 7 in the morning till 6, 7 at night of live surgery, and then the lectures. So as I told Diana, I said, this isn't going to last long. I'm going to run out of things to say. There's
yeah.
just so much going on. So bear with me and let me have my fun, and it'll be over in probably a couple, 3 years. Well, little did I realize, in fact, looking back at that very first bone graft course compared to what I do teach today, my goodness, it'd be
Yeah.
like a Model T Ford and a brand new, Porsche, just totally different birds. And
Mm,
again, a reflection of the evolution of our technology and our advances
yeah.
in so many arenas of our specialty, and within all of dentistry for that matter. So probably year 10 is when it really hit home. Like, you know what? You're not going to walk away from this. There's just no way. It's in the blood. It's an addiction now,
Mhm.
and it's just going to keep going as long as I'm functional and have
Yeah.
presence of mind to uh to do my thing. And by the way, I'm still active clinically 4 days a week. I'm
Yeah.
sure I'll be slowing that down, but the fact that I can do the surgery that I'm still doing, and in turn bring it to my institute, is really a true blessing, because in order to walk the talk, you've got to show what you're doing,
Mhm.
not being retired and 7, 10 years later teaching things that are outdated. So
Yeah.
I've always taken pride in keeping as cutting edge as I can with everything that I do.
Yeah. So, talk to me about how you perceive the institute and what makes it stand apart. I hear the fact that you, as the often lead instructor, I think almost always lead instructor, have a a huge body of relevant experience, clinical experience, and current clinical experience, the live portion of it. What else makes the institute's offering kind of stand out in your mind?
I think, Pete, the if I had to point at one particular item,
Hmm.
I'll call it credibility. And I
Yeah.
don't mean to sit here and just toot my own horn and blow hot air up my dress. It's just that credibility is important in this day and age. I've
Yeah.
taken pride in truly walking the talk. And what I'm saying is I respect the power of the podium very
Right.
much,
Hmm.
because any of us that are educators know that we can pretty much influence an audience pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
And that's good and it's bad, because if you're not really being upfront and saying, telling it like it is, then you
Yeah.
can certainly mislead your course attendees. So I've really taken that to heart over the years, from day one for that matter.
Hmm.
So credibility is important in that I won't present anything that I'm not doing in my practice on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis. So
Yeah.
my attendees know that we're not going to be talking, an N of one or an N of two. No, no, I will have done multiple procedures, making sure I've got the protocol down pat. If it's a
Yeah.
bone graft material I'm working with, until I have my own histology using labs that I select and that I'm paying for, so I'm not influenced by anybody.
Yeah.
Only until then will I present that material as saying, "Hey, folks, this this works. And
Yeah.
if when it doesn't, here's how to handle the problem. And for that matter, complications plays a huge role in all of my courses.
Yeah.
Anywhere from 2 to 4 hours of material just on complications in any of my 3 or 4 day courses. So that's very important. And those are my complications I'm showing, by the way,
Yeah.
not anybody else's. That's important to show that yes, hey, I'm human like anybody else, and things
Hmm.
happen to me regardless of how many implants, 35,000 plus I've placed, how many thousands of bone grafts and soft tissue grafts. Things happen,
Yeah.
and folks like to see that. Otherwise, if we're just showing the best of what we can show, then that's a misleading element in and of itself. So
Yeah.
credibility is probably the big thing that separates, I would say, me and the Institute. And
Yeah.
secondly, close second would be more or less how we go about things. I'm a slow learner. I really am. It takes me time to absorb material. Of course, when I get it, I've got it, but therefore I teach from that perspective. So
Yeah.
repetition and different techniques of educating our attendees, I've kind of incorporated over the years by trial and error, so to speak, and learning and reading up on literally how is, what are the best methods and methodologies of being able to educate folks
Mm.
from all realms of background, meaning from a slow learner to the very, top shelf, more or less photographic memory kind of person, and everybody in between. So that's been, I think, very important. And those two elements alone allow us to have alumni that come back every 3, 4, 5 years for refreshers.
Yeah.
They know that I tell them that the half-life of our non-core material, I mean, core is anatomy, things like that that will never
Mhm.
change, are solid and will stay the same, of course. But the non-core material with
Yeah.
with the technological advances that we have today, my goodness, I used to say it was a 3-year half-life on that. Now it's more like a year or so.
Wow.
So what I'm saying is that a fair amount of the material we present in any given year becomes obsolete by the following year or so. So with
Yeah.
that in mind, it's like, okay, you know, mm, is Picos really updating his courses? Oh, yes. In fact, in any given calendar year, I get tired of seeing the same kind of cases myself. So for no
Hmm.
other reason, I'm bringing something in and having to take something away. So keeping up with current advances and what have you is another big plus that's at the heart of what we do. And lastly, it's just our kind of corporate culture, if you will. I like to term ourselves the Ritz-Carlton of CE, in that the ambiance, the overall experience that we want to make sure our attendees do truly have
Yeah.
is a real one. And that together really gives us I would say the branding of something very special, something very different.
Yep. I was going to ask you about the Ritz-Carlton of CE if you didn't bring it up, so I'm glad you did. To me, just reflecting back on what you say about the Institute, what I hear are so many of your core values that you had instilled from a child. The humility that you have, that y- you'd be willing as a leader in your field to talk about complications. You humanize the procedures for an audience. It takes a level of humility and confidence to do. The fact that you're a student of your profession, and it not just a profession of dentistry, but now as an instructor, that you're studying how to perfect the skill of presenting for various members of your audience, really with the goal of educating them in the way that they best learn. And then the striving for excellence that you learned from your dad, went from carpentry to an institute that's taught 6,000 people in the last 34 years. It's very cool to hear that thread pull through a lifetime. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
You've accomplished so much in these years. How do you stay humble?
Well, honestly, again, back to my roots,
Yeah.
My dad would always say, and of course it's biblical, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing.
Mm.
And I've always remembered that. And
Yeah.
it is important because, quite honestly, we all learn from each other,
Yeah.
and we're all products of so many people. And in
Yeah.
my particular case, from a professional perspective, I could rattle off probably 25 names that have impacted me, names of people that have impacted me over
Yeah.
the years. And as the
Yeah.
old saying goes, we stand on the shoulders of so many giants
Hmm.
ahead of us that have preceded us, rather, that,
Yeah.
to take credit for really anything. Oh, I'm innovative to a degree. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. But truly, I'm indebted to so many individuals that created the environment for me, the learning experience, gave me so much information and guiding principles that, I consider myself a facilitator,
Yeah.
educator, sure, but by facilitator, I mean I'm just passing on information that I have learned from, so many others over the years. Yes, I've morphed it into a certain way of doing things. Yes, that's unique to me for sure.
Yeah.
But to sit and beat my chest and tell everybody how great I am and all that type of thing, that'll never happen because I'm just like anybody else. And I convey that message to all of my course attendees all the time, in that I tell everyone the same thing, and that is that all of you can do what I'm doing.
Hmm.
Just depends on your your particular skill sets that you come to me with, and what background you have. That will dictate where you're at on the old learning curve,
Yeah.
and in turn, what you can take from any of the courses and implement immediately. Other
Hmm.
things you're going to have to put off because you're not ready for that particular, procedure, etc. So the fact that we're all the same,
Yeah.
that to me, yeah, it's the ultimate of humility because it's true. It's true. I'm
Right.
no better than anybody else, and I mean that in every sense of the word.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Mike. I thought you were going to say Diane. I would have answered first. How do you stay humble, Pete? Been do.
Well, I did marry up. I have to tell you that, quite honestly, Pete. Diane's an amazing person for me, and it was a perfect fit for me to be able to do what I've done over the years and the sacrifices that she's made, for
Mm.
sure.
Yeah, you and me both. We share that in common. We married up in life. It's a good place to be, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, if we don't mind, I'd love to just pivot. You started a bit of a new chapter in life with partnering with Thurston and forming MODIS. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how did you get to a point where partnership made sense to you?
Well, Pete, interesting backstory. Private equity to me, up
Hmm.
until maybe 2 years ago, if someone said PE, I would have said, yeah, pulmonary embolus. I had
Right.
no clue that that was also an acronym for private equity.
Yeah.
So for almost a year, I was involved with a different group, that very interesting one, and one that
Yeah.
will definitely do well ultimately. But after that full year experience, it just didn't seem like the best fit for me personally,
Yeah.
because the practice was more of importance than my institute. And
Yeah.
to separate these two entities really would be not a good thing. There's such synergy between them.
Yeah.
So after that didn't quite work out, it wasn't but a month or so later that the folks from Thurston got in touch with me, and had done some homework, obviously, to really appreciate and understand, at least to a large degree, what my institute was about,
Hmm.
and wanted to create something very special, something very different. And in doing some homework with the Thurston Group and what they're all about, I
Yeah.
realized rather quickly that this is not just another private equity group. This These folks have a great track record, in
Yep.
particular, one that is tried and proven through other platforms that they had created, namely the first to be involved with the specialties. For
Hmm.
example, oral surgeons, USOMS, the US Endo group with orthodontists, smile docs,
Yeah.
etc. So that was impressive to know that for sure. And the success that these platforms have had over time,
Sure.
that kind of put me at ease to know that not dealing with just, another private equity group. And the fact that they really liked the idea of education being at the heart of the platform, specifically my institute, we were in alignment rather quickly. So
Yeah.
that kind of hit a real nerve. And so things just kind of really got better from there. And
Yep.
then meeting, the folks at the hierarchy all the way down to you in particular, Pete, as our CEO, proof of concept that, dealing with good folks
Yeah.
and ex-military, by the way, for the most part, most of the individuals that I have a real soft spot in my heart for because of my dad being, again, a Navy veteran, World War II, as I
Yeah.
mentioned. I like black and white. I like people that are very transparent. No gray zones. You know where people stand. I like that. I was raised that way. Again,
Hmm.
with, my dad being his background, etc. And so all of things, like the planets all kind of lined up.
Yeah.
And again, being in alignment with the educational base for the platform, I think just made all the sense and allowed me to do now something I wanted to do from the get-go, but the resources and or the time frame would be accelerated now dramatically and in a
Hmm.
much more efficient mode for sure.
Yeah. So I think now's a good time, Mike. You had brought something up earlier in our conversation around, you know, challenges of a practitioner, things you wish you had done differently. And you, I think, said something to the effect of nobody teaches you in dental school how to run a business. So here we are. We've founded Modis Dental Partners. It is both an operating company that will continue to grow through acquisition and an institute, which is quite unique in the world of DSOs. And I think it's seems like a good time, Mike, to talk about how you think Modis can impact the profession in a positive way, particularly the business side of it.
Sure. And I think this truly, as I did mention briefly before, is at the heart of the Institute now, because
Mhm.
clinically, no question, I've had all these alumni over the years take my courses, and we'll continue to have more folks
Yeah.
coming through. But the one element that I think is so important is the business sector, because quite honestly, how many of my attendees over the years were truly able to take back and implement not just the
Mm.
surgical principles and related items that I share with them, but to do it in a very not just productive, but efficient mode and profitable mode. I think
Yeah.
that's the key. So how can we be profitable with incorporating new techniques into our practice? Well, obviously we have to know metrics, things like KPIs, key performance indicators that play such a critical role in allowing us to evaluate our practices and know where we stand, et cetera, et cetera. So with that said, as I mentioned, the business course that we incorporated into the Institute for the first time in February and then again in June
Yeah.
were very well received. And those courses will continue to be offered to the general public, so to speak. But unique to this platform will be further business courses that will be focused on treatment coordinators, front desk, surgical assistants, hygienists, et cetera, that will allow the clinician, the doc, to literally be able to understand, and in many cases, probably for the first time, what his or her practice is truly all about from a pure business perspective, and be able to
Mhm.
make decisions then accordingly that will
Yeah.
that will allow that individual and that practice to grow organically in a very, very efficient mode. These are things that I honestly wish I had available to me in years back, because we now have at our fingertips the ability to do these types of procedures, yes, but from a business perspective, again, to understand how we can grow our practices efficiently by incorporating them, the different techniques and protocols, sure, but our case type and case value will continue to increase as we understand how this all comes together.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It sounds like, for 34 years, you've spent the majority of your time at the Institute elevating the practice of medicine, particularly within implantology. And what you saw was an opportunity and a need, not just an opportunity, but a need for practices to not only elevate the level of medicine, but it also has to coincide with uh, an equivalent growth in the business operations in order to have a true partnership and a lasting impact on the communities that they serve.
No question. The missing link, as I call it, is the business sector or business pillar that
Yeah.
we've added to the institute. It took about 2.5, 3 years to put it together,
Mm-hmm.
but we've got it now to a point where it really is kind of a fine-tuned machine. Like everything else within the institute, I take pride in taking time developing the course well before it really becomes a true course that I introduce to my attendees.
Yeah. So for those that aren't as familiar with the Institute, what are the 4 pillars?
Well, they are as follows. We'll group a number of our courses under the topic of bone grafting.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second pillar is under soft tissue grafting and tissue maintenance. You can imagine the courses there from an aesthetic zone perspective. And then the third pillar would be full arch immediate reconstruction, where we start with what I'll term an all on XYZ course,
Yeah.
not just all on X, and there's reasons for that. And then a gradation to guided full arch, and then, of course, full-blown full arch, including the higher skill set that's involved here, meaning zygomatic implants, pterygoid implants, and subnasal, etc. These are all arenas of a higher level of full arch reconstruction. And then last but not least, the business pillar.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. So what makes you excited about the future? What energizes you about the future?
Well, that's an easy one, Pete, because as I said, I love to learn. I love to be involved with the most cutting edge technologies that are available to us.
Yeah.
So with that said, there's so much happening from the digital world in particular that we've incorporated a number of years ago. Our scanners that we've had for quite some time, our photogrammetry technology is now 6 years old with us. I've been involved in some research now with tetranite, which is an amazing bone grafting / cement material that's going to truly revolutionize, I believe, the practice of dentistry in general, and certainly surgical-based grafting and what have you, surgical-based reconstruction of our ridges. So this technology, as a quick example, is just one that I've been involved with about 5, 6 years now. Going to take some more time to come to market, but again, had I not gotten involved with it, would know nothing about it, except to tell you that, yes, it's going to be something very exciting. So these types of things keep me pumped up for sure. Again, it's an addiction to be able to not just teach, but also to clinically be active with my patients, whom I love. And over the years, really just made me just have such a great appreciation and satisfaction from a professional perspective. And then certainly being able to incorporate these items into the Institute. So they go hand in hand. So I guess the short answer would be I just love to learn, and the new technologies are exploding. I wish I were 30 years younger to be around longer to take advantage of what's coming down the pike, because it's super exciting.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And as we start to wrap, I'll ask one last question, and it's an open-ended one. Is, what would you like to share with the audience? It could be about where we're heading. It could be about, your choice to partner and form MODIS. I just want to leave you with the open-ended question of, what would you like to share with the audience today?
Well, to that, Pete, I would say the following, and that is that this platform is set up to be nothing but successful. I'll start with that. And I say that because of the fact that it is and truly based around and for the Institute as I've have to this point. But what I see this morphing into is nothing but tremendous vertical growth for all the practices that will be on board with MODIS. And I say that because organic growth will be very solid, very genuine, and will in turn mean, as any relationship should be, will result in a true win-win for each clinician and his or her practice and group practice, because the opportunity to allow for great growth in terms of implant-based work in particular, yes, but we also have the means to allow for good organic growth in all phases of the practices that get involved. Because of, again, our business sector, we have now software that allows us to monitor and track our patients very accurately from the time they make first contact with our practice, be it on the telephone or in person, all the way through to completion and follow-up. A very unique methodology now to be able to allow for that type of growth that I'm mentioning. So in a nutshell, this platform is being built to, of course, morph into something very strong and have vertical growth to be sustained well after I'm out of the picture. And that's really the most important message I could probably share with our audience, that, my legacy, my name, my branding, my reputation is all on the line, so to speak. And that's okay, because I feel super comfortable partnering with a group like Thurston and all the individuals that represent this amazing private equity group. They care not just about numbers, but about us as clinicians. And that may sound like a cliche, but it's true. And I'm experiencing that as we're talking.
Great. Hey, thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you, Pete.
Thanks for listening to Community Conversations. This podcast is powered by MODIS Dental Partners, an organization dedicated to supporting dental professionals with cutting-edge technology and continuing education opportunities through the Pikos Institute. If you enjoyed what you heard, follow Community Conversations wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.